So someone asked me as I was setting up this morning what this creature is. It's a pride axolotl. And I'm very taken with it. A couple of months ago when I had surgery, a friend came out of Walgreens with it and a big bottle of ibuprofen, and I just started weeping. So this is my emotional support axolotl. The prevailing feeling of these last couple of weeks has been a deep sense of grief. There are people going through a lot in our midst, people that we have lost. Jackie Moore did pass on Thursday, and people who are facing incredible odds and health crises and things going on in their families. Like, it is a tough season for us right now, myself included, even coming off of vacation. So the sermon I had planned was sort of one that was going to put us through our paces. The name of it was How to Tame a Wildfire. That James scripture, I was struggling with whether or not to just yank the whole thing and start over with, passages about God's presence and God's comfort. And I decided to keep it, even though I don't find James particularly comforting. I find him very invigorating. He has a lot of opinions, a lot of fire, a lot of... I find something that looks a lot like my faith when I look at the writing of James, and I go, oh, when lots of other Christians say that I don't count, I can point to James and say, wait a second, yes, I do. This is in our scripture, and there is a basis for who we are as people of faith. And he kind of goes off, right? James, for a short book, he kind of has a lot of rants, and this is one of his rants about the power of the tongue. He obviously was in some, a lot of times I think scripture comes out of, well, we didn't know we needed to talk about it, and then something happened, and now we have to, right? That's the history of Levitical law. That didn't need to be a law, and then someone did something silly, and now it has to be a law, and now we have to write it down. If you're a classroom teacher, you know how that goes, right? You didn't think that through, and then some kid was really creative, and now it's a law for the rest of your career in your classroom that, you can't have chewing gum, or whatever it is, right? So there are, lots of scriptures very responsive to our needs, and so I get curious about what did James go through that convinced him that the tongue was fully evil, right? That there was, he holds some space. He said, we can bless God with our tongue, we can, we can bless each other with it. He holds space for the fact that clear water could come from the tongue, but he's like, yeah, but mostly it's salt water. Nothing grows here, right? So he's holding these two things. He has hope for what our speech can do, and he has a lot of pessimism, probably because of what he's seen. And I don't know what kind of division he saw to make him write that way, but if you've ever been in a place where there was a lot of gossip, where there was a lot of discord, where there was a lot of backbiting, where there was a lot of inside and outside, it's very easy to imagine what he might have gone through to make him write, nope, absolutely not. This is a wildfire. It's going to set everything on fire. There's nothing good that comes out of anything that we say to each other. And where that might have come from emotionally and spiritually for him. What I know, though, is that most people aren't trying to hurt each other. Most of us want other people to be okay. There is a deep desire for our own okayness, right? For everyone to just be all right. And more often than not, when we harm one another with our speech, it isn't because we're trying to hurt them. It's because we said something dumb, right? And that was that idea of the bridle, right? You have to hold every word as in control, right? And sometimes something slips out that we didn't mean, or we said it unskillfully or inelegantly, or didn't quite know what to say in a situation, and that ended up hurting someone. I want to circle this back around to grief. When people are grieving, people say a lot of dumb stuff, right? Oh, it was God's will, it was just their time. No, my loved one just died. I don't want your baloney theology telling me I'm not allowed to feel the thing that I'm feeling. Oh, God just needed another angel. Horse crap, I want them here. Right? Like when we hear those kinds of things, everything in us just says no. And those of us who have been grieving, we know what that feels like when there's a misalignment between someone who's trying to comfort you and the dumb stuff they're saying. You know it comes from a good place, but they might not know what to say to speak into your terminal diagnosis. They may not know what to say to speak into your divorce. They may not know how to just be with you. And so I want to hold this from both sides, right? I have said some inelegant, unskillful things, even when I was a grief counselor, probably especially when I was a grief counselor, because I hadn't gone through my own grief yet. My career as a grief counselor actually ended 2 weeks before my mother died. And then I knew in my body all of the things that I'd said to people. Now I knew them from a different place, and now I knew how I'd missed the mark with some of the people that I had cared for too. I am a better grief counselor now, having gone through those things, but I was doing my best at 25. I'd read all the books, I knew all the theories, right? But it doesn't actually help us make human connection. This society, I'll say, our culture really doesn't like grief. You get 3 days of bereavement leave if you're working, and then it's right back to work. Go back to being normal. We ask dumb stuff of people who have just gone through basically an emotional car wreck. Go function at the level that you were before, and we just can't. The number one question I got when I was a grief counselor was, am I crazy? And the answer is no. This society is not set up for you to feel the full spectrum of the things that you're feeling. But I also know that because our society is set up this way, and if you don't have a 3-year degree with a focus on counseling, then you probably might not know what to say to someone who's grieving. That there might be skills that you might not have because we can't do what we've never been taught, right? Big Book says you can't transmit what you don't have. Right? And so I want to hold space that it doesn't mean you're bad, it doesn't mean that you're wrong, it just means you haven't had the opportunity to grow that skill set yet. And so I have one short video and 2 children's books. Because one of my friend Vanessa Little, I mentioned her in the introduction, she said, sometimes children's books teach better than any highfalutin, I could give you all of the theory, I could spell it out for you and cite all of my sources, but these 2 little books, I think, will teach us more than anything I could write an academic paper on, and my thesis is on grief and funerals, right? So the first thing I want to play is a video by Brene Brown. Are we familiar with Brene Brown? So she is a social worker who really is combating shame and inviting us into vulnerability. So when I talk about shame and vulnerability, I'm drawing from her work quite a bit. And so this is about the difference between sympathy and empathy and how we might be able to companion one another better and some of the common mistakes we might make trying to be present to someone else in their pain and what we might do instead. It's also cute animation of adorable animals. Rarely can a response make anything better, but connection can. Doesn't that give us more freedom? So instead of being afraid of saying the wrong thing, The right thing is always just to show up. And so this book, given to me by the beautiful Sarah Weatherman, is called Tear Soup. And it goes through how we might misstep with some folks who are grieving and the wisdom that we hold when we are grieving and what can happen when we connect with people who get it. And so I want to share this story. Tear Soup, a recipe for healing after loss. There once was an old and somewhat wise woman whom everyone called Grandy. She just suffered a big loss in her life. Pops, her husband, suffered the same loss but in his own way. This is the story of how Grandy faced her loss by setting out to make tear soup. For many years, the custom of making tear soup had been forgotten. As people's lives became more rushed, they found it easier to pull soup in a can from the shelf and heat it on the stove. But several years ago, Grandy got a taste of a well-seasoned tear soup. One of her friends made it from scratch after her child died. As soon as Grandy tasted the rich flavor of that carefully made soup, she promised herself never again to assume that quicker was better. Because of her great loss, Grandy knew this time her recipe for tear soup would call for a big pot. With a big pot, she would have plenty of room for all the memories, all the misgivings, all the feelings, and all the tears she needed to stew in the pot over time. She put on her apron because she knew it would get messy. It seems that grief is never clean. People feel misunderstood, feelings get hurt, and wrong assumptions are made all over the place. To make matters worse, grief always takes longer to cook than anyone wants it to. And then, Grandy started to cry. At first, she sobbed. And sometimes when she was in a safe place where no one could hear her, she even wailed. Sometimes she wept quietly. Grandy knew she had to make much of this part of the soup alone. She learned from past experiences that most people don't like being around tears. Her friends would worry if they knew just how many tears Grandy's recipe called for this time. So the old and somewhat wise woman reflected on her own special recipe as she looked down into the large, overflowing pot of memories. It was a task she would repeat many times during the next few months. Grandy winced when she took a sip of the broth. All she could taste was salt from her teardrops. It tasted bitter, but she knew this was where she had to start. And for now, it was the only thing on her menu. There were things that Grandy never wanted to forget. These included the good times and the bad times, the silly and the sad times. With her arms full of memories, Grandy made many trips to the kitchen. One at a time, she slowly stirred all her precious and not so precious memories into the pot. But eventually, she ran out of things to add. Grandy's arms ached and she felt stone cold and empty. There were no words that could describe the pain she was feeling. What's more, when she looked out the window, it surprised her to see how the rest of the world was going on as usual while her world had stopped. Her grandson, Chester, who wanted Grandy to be happy again, hoped his chocolate drops would make her feel better. Mrs. Bloomklotz, Miss Chadwick, and Mr. Long, all brave yet fearful neighbors, dropped by to see how Grandy was doing. They filled the air with words, but none of their words took the smell of tear soup away. Grandy was gracious because she knew how helpless her friends felt. They wanted to fix her, but they couldn't. All Grandy really needed from them at that moment was a knowing look and a warm hug. There were also days when Grandy hungered for a thoughtful ear. Sometimes she would ask total strangers, "Care to join me in a bowl of tear soup?" "No thanks," most would reply. "I don't have time for tear soup today." Even some of Grandy's friends hurried past her house and pretended not to notice the aroma of tear soup coming through her open door. Grandy found that most people can tolerate only a cup of someone else's tear soup. The giant bowl, where Grandy could repeatedly share her sadness in great detail, was left for a few willing friends. "I'm here," Midge cried. "I got here as fast as I could, and I'll be here whenever you need me. What a tragedy. I'm so sorry you're having to make such a big pot of soup." Oh, what a relief. Grandy knew she didn't have to be careful what she said around Midge. Midge wouldn't try to talk her out of anything she was feeling, and Grandy could even laugh and not worry that Midge would assume Grandy was over her grief. "Sorry I couldn't get here sooner," said Midge. "No problem," replied Grandy. "I've had plenty of help, but most of these friends will be history pretty soon. They'll be over my tragedy long before I am. But I know you'll still be around." "I don't know what to say, but I'll be glad to listen," Midge said tenderly. "Come on, tell me about it while we make some bread to go along with your soup." These two friends, who had shared 1,000 laughs and just as many tears, pounded at the bread dough together. "I feel like unraveling," Grandy cried. "I'm mad, I'm confused, I can't make any decisions, nobody can make me feel good, I'm a mess. I just didn't realize it would be this hard." "Why don't we go for a walk while we wait for the bread to rise?" Midge suggested. "I know exercise is supposed to help me, but I feel like I have concrete blocks strapped to my legs. We'd better not go too far or you'll have to carry me home," moaned Grandy. Mrs. Cries-a-Lot called and reminded Grandy that she had been making tear soup for years and would be more than glad to come right over and show her how to make it the correct way. "Thanks, but no," said Grandy. "This pot has my name on it." Grandy knew better than to let Mrs. Cries-a-Lot or anyone else tell her what she should do to get through this terrible loss. Next, her recipe called for some comfort food. For Grandy, this meant mashed potatoes and ice cream. Comfort food always makes you feel better, at least for a little while. It gets past that big lump in your throat when no other foods can. I think it needs some chocolate, too. After all, it was her soup. Grandy kept attending worship even though she was mad at God. Sometimes she yelled at God and asked why this happened, and sometimes she demanded to know where God was when she was feeling so all alone. Still, Grandy trusted God, but she didn't understand God. She sensed that people believed if she really had faith, she would be spared deep sorrow, anger, and loneliness. Grandy kept reminding herself to be grateful for all the emotions that God had given her. On some afternoons, people would ask questions like, "Is it soup yet?" Or, "How long is it going to take? You've been at this for over a month now. It's time to get out of the kitchen." Grandy fumed at the caller's advice. Grandy looked forward to getting the mail each day. She dreaded the day when no more sympathy cards would come. When she was alone and needed to think, she found it helpful to keep notes on her soup making. Thank goodness Grandy and Pops had been married a long time. They already knew each other's tear soup would be different. Secretly, Grandy wished Pops would be put more flavoring in his soup, but he doesn't want to, and he's perfectly content to dine alone and sip his own soup. Making tear soup is hard work. Sometimes it was all she could think about. Even the things Grandy used to love, she didn't have the energy for. She didn't care about anymore. Some of Grandy's friends over the years had not tended to their tear soup. Their soup boiled over and the pot scorched. What a mess. It took them a long time to clean up their pots and to start over. The smell of burnt soup still lingers in some of their homes. Grandy knew there were times when she needed to take a break from her soup making. Even though it was hard to do, she forced herself to get away. Grandy heard that a neighbor was having to take her turn in the kitchen. Some people thought that the neighbor was eating too much tear soup. So Grandy, being an old and somewhat wise woman, called and invited her to a special soup gathering where it's not bad manners to cry in your soup or have second helpings. Soon, the thoughtful cook sat at Grandy's table and discussed the process of making tear soup. There are some parts that require help from friends and some parts you just have to do alone. They shared stories about soup making they wouldn't dare tell anyone else for fear of being judged a bad cook. They all laughed knowingly when Grandy remarked how on days when she was daydreaming while driving, she was glad that the car seemed to know where she wanted to go. These people had become Grandy's new best friends. One day, as Grandy and Chester were going for a drive, Chester asked, "Mom says you've been making tear soup. What does she mean?" "Well, tear soup is a way for you to sort through all of the different types of feelings and memories you have when you lose someone or something special. Remember when your baby brother died right before he was born and your mom sat for days holding his blanket and weeping? She was making tear soup. You made tear soup yourself by acting out your own disappointment when you shouted at Jason, wishing his brother would die too. Remember when Billy's dog died and he didn't want to play with you? Not feeling like having fun is one of the ingredients of tear soup also. And remember when Aunt Meg got divorced and they had to move? There was a lot of tear soup simmering in that house. Some days when you're making tear soup, it's even hard to breathe. Some days you feel like running away. You just hope a better day comes along soon. And then comes one of the hardest parts of making tear soup. It's when you decide it may be okay to eat something instead of soup all the time. The next morning, as Grandy was cleaning up, Chester asked her if she was done making tear soup. "Well, I don't think you actually ever finished. The hard work of making this batch of soup is almost done, though. I'll put the rest in the freezer, and we'll pull it out from time to time to have a little taste." "So what else have you learned by making tear soup, Grandy?" "I've learned that grief, like a pot of soup, changes the longer it simmers and the more things you put into it. I've learned that sometimes people say unkind things, but they really don't mean to hurt you. And most importantly, I've learned that there is something down deep within all of us, ready to help survive the things we think we can't survive. Grandy, you know so much. What will I do after you die? Don't worry. I'll leave you my recipe for tear soup." The end. Yeah. So this book, entitled Maybe Tomorrow, was given to me by a friend who's a preschool teacher after my mom died. And so I want to share it with you because tear soup kind of goes into some of the missteps we can make with one another, and maybe tomorrow is an example of connection rather than just a verbal response. Elba has a big block and she's been dragging it around for a long time. Norris dances everywhere he goes, even uphill. He is always surrounded by a happy cloud of butterflies. Can Norris and his butterflies help ease Elba's sadness and convince her to join them on a trip to the ocean? This tender exploration of loss illuminates how kindness, empathy, and friendship can lift our spirits and see us through many tomorrows. So, maybe tomorrow. Elba had a big block. She'd been dragging it around for a long time. It made her walk slowly. It made her think darkly. It was heavy. Norris danced everywhere he went, even uphill. One day, Elba was sitting on her block in the park like she usually did. Along came Norris in a cloud of butterflies. At first, Elba couldn't see him in all that shininess. "Hello, I'm Norris," he said. "Do you want to go on a picnic?" "I'm Elba," said Elba. "I do not go on picnics." "Well, what do you want to do?" asked Norris. "Sit here on my block." But you're already doing that. I know. Is it fun? Not really, no. Well, what's in it? Norris wanted to know. In it? Said Elba. What do you mean? Well, it's a box, isn't it? Something must be inside it. It's not a box, it's a block, said Elba. Are you sure? Asked Norris. Yes, said Elba, prodding it with her umbrella. She always carried one in case it rained. Norris sat down next to Elba. I feel something in there, he said. What? Asked Elba, who didn't feel a thing. Something sad, Norris said. I think it wants to come out. How? Whispered Elba. Norris and Elba sat there thinking. The butterflies flitted this way and that. Maybe tomorrow, said Norris as the sun set. Maybe, said Elba. The next day it was raining. The butterflies looked a little damp. The weather didn't slow down Norris, though. You're making me dizzy, said Elba. It's time for tea, said Norris. They had a good, quiet tea with rain in it. Maybe tomorrow, said Norris. Maybe, said Elba, if tomorrow ever comes. Tomorrow didn't come, but another today did. It's really time, said Norris, because I want you to come to the ocean with me. Okay, I'll just take my block, said Elba, surprising herself. But it's too heavy, she added. Right? My butterflies and I will help you, said Norris. They did help. It was a very, very long journey. Elba and Norris talked and didn't talk. I miss Little Bird, said Elba as they crested the last hill. She is gone. I miss her too, said Norris. Elba paused. But you didn't know her. No, but you are my friend, so I can help you miss her. By the time they got to the shore, Norris knew many things about Little Bird. We watched the moon together, Elba said. She taught me to sing. We were hardly ever apart. She loved you, Norris said. Yes, said Elba as the waves crashed. Some of the butterflies started to fly out toward the horizon. Come back, shouted Elba. It's okay, said Norris. Sometimes we have to let things go. They both sat down to rest on Elba's block. But there wasn't enough room. I think it's smaller, said Elba in amazement, and lighter. Definitely, agreed Norris. Together they stood and faced the roaring sea. I'll always have this block, you know, said Elba. Yes, maybe you will, said Norris, but I will help you carry it sometimes. The two friends stayed by the ocean until the sun set and the view was calm. Some of the butterflies came back. Some flew off forever. The next day was sunny. Do you want to go on a picnic? Norris asked. Yes, said Elba. The end. So in this time of grief, dear friends, may we take lessons from children's books. May we be gentle with each other. May we help each other make tear soup. May we help each other carry our big blocks. May we ask questions about those we have lost, remember them fondly, let go what we need to let go of, and companion each other as well as we can. Amen.